The storm had no mercy that evening. Clouds hung low like judgment, thunder growled through the sky, and lightning split the heavens open as though something sacred was about to be born, or broken. In the middle of that chaos, Kemi stood in the rusted courtyard of the old orphanage, soaked to the bone, with her feet buried in mud and her soul trembling under the weight of a decision that would change her life forever. The children inside watched her from behind fogged-up windows, their faces blank, eyes hollow. Hope as unfamiliar to them as a mother's kiss. Most would have turned back, most already had. But Kemi didn't move. She stared at the creaking metal sign that read, House of Mercy, even though there hadn't been much mercy in that place for a long time. She took a slow breath and stepped forward, her fingers clutching the small, wet photograph in her coat pocket. A photograph she didn't need anymore, not since she buried her husband and the tiny life they lost before it had a name. Inside, the matron barely lifted her eyes. She'd seen women like Kemi before, widows, dreamers, charity chasers, but none had lasted. "I came for the boys," Kemi said simply. The matron looked up now, confused. "Which boys?" Kemi pulled out the photograph anyway and held it out with a trembling hand. "I don't mean those in the brochures. I mean the ones no one asks for." The silence in that room was louder than the thunder outside. "Follow me," the matron finally said, voice dry. They passed rooms lined with metal beds and thin blankets, where children stared blankly at peeling ceilings. But then the matron opened a back door and led her down a narrow hallway. "These 5, no one wants them," she said with a sigh. "Some say they're cursed, I say they're just forgotten." Kemi stepped into the dim room. 5 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Bola was 17, tall and silent, his gaze like iron forged in fire. His hands were clenched, protective, as if he was waiting to be attacked. Next to him stood Jide, stocky and sharp-eyed, who looked like he'd punch the wind if it looked at him wrong. His shoulders were tense, every breath short. In the corner sat Toby, knees drawn to his chest, lips moving wordlessly as if whispering poems to the floor. Beside him lounged Emeka, masking his pain with a smirk too tired for his age. He winked at her as if daring her to try and fix him. And then there was little Sei, no older than 6, his leg bent strangely beneath him, and his eyes, those dark, endless eyes, held a silence so deep it felt ancient. They didn't speak. They didn't cry. They just watched. And something in Kemi's chest cracked open like a dam. "I'll take them," she said. The matron stared. "All of them?" "All of them," Kemi repeated, her voice firmer this time. "You can't." "I already did." No one believed she would go through with it. But a week later, with signatures on brittle paper and worn clothes packed into thin bags, the 5 boys walked out of that forgotten orphanage with the woman who wore secondhand shoes and the fire of a warrior in her eyes. They didn't smile. They didn't trust her, but they followed. The home she brought them to wasn't much. 2 crumbling rooms with more rats than furniture, and a roof that coughed during storms. But she called it blessing, like it was made of gold. She laid out the mattress and let them eat the last bit of yam she had. She didn't sleep that first night. She listened to their breathing. Each exhale, like a story yet untold. Each silence like a wound she hadn't found yet. It took weeks before they spoke to her, not with words, but with actions. Bola swept the compound without being asked. Jide stood by the door every night like a guard dog. Toby began to draw again on scrap paper with charcoal. Emeka started calling her Oga Mama, half tease, half affection, Sei. Began humming faintly while staring at the stars. Love didn't happen all at once. It crept in soft as dawn, slow as healing. Kemi sold everything she had. Her wedding ring, her Sunday dresses, even the necklace her mother gave her before passing. She used it to buy textbooks. She used it to sew uniforms. She used it to build dreams out of broken walls. When the boys asked why she did it, she simply said, "Because someone once gave me love when I had nothing. But even love wasn't enough for the world outside." The neighbors mocked her. "5 orphans? You must be cursed." Her brother stopped speaking to her. "You should have remarried." "Not adopted strangers." The church elders shook their heads. "You're spoiling criminals in the making." She endured it all because she saw what no one else saw. She saw Bola's pain when he flinched at sudden movement. She saw Jade's scars and how he refused to cry. She saw the genius in Toby's scribbled poetry. She saw the laughter Emeka hid under jokes. She saw the storm in Sei's silence, the way he stared at shoes he never had. And she poured herself into them, every drop of her being. At night, she taught them scriptures. In the morning, she walked them to school, her back bent with fatigue, but her eyes bright with belief. When food was scarce, she ate last. When school fees rose, she worked double shifts washing clothes until her hands bled. One day, she collapsed while sweeping. The boys panicked. Bola ran to the neighbor's compound for help. Jide poured water over her face. Toby wrote a prayer on a torn page and placed it on her chest. Emeka knelt and said, "Don't go, Oga Mama. Who'll fight for us?" Sei crawled into her arms and whispered one word, "Stay." It was the first word he'd spoken in years. She stayed, and they grew. They grew into men. Bola became a teacher, disciplined, wise, and quiet. Jide joined the army, his rage shaped into bravery. Toby became a writer, his poems published across Africa. Emeka, the clown, became an actor, his face on TV, his laugh unforgettable. Sei, the silent one, became a doctor, ironically, a specialist in pediatric trauma. But success didn't come overnight. There were rejections, failures, hunger, and through it all, Kemi remained their anchor, even when they left home, even when letters stopped coming as often, even when her hands trembled from age and the nights grew too quiet. She never blamed them. She just smiled at their pictures on the wall and whispered their names like prayers. Until one day, her roof caved in. It was the rainy season again, just like it had been the day she found them. Neighbors found her crushed beneath the fallen rafters, still clutching a Bible and the photo of the 5 boys. They carried her to the clinic. There was no electricity, barely any medicine, and no space. But word traveled, first to Lagos, then to London, then to Canada, Accra, and Abuja. The boys came. Within hours, they were on flights, trains, and buses. They didn't recognize each other at first. Grown men with tired eyes, but their embrace made the walls shake. They found her unconscious, breathing slowly. The doctors didn't have hope. She might not wake, they said. But when Sei held her hand and whispered, "We're here, Mama," her eyes fluttered open. She smiled. They cried. They apologized. They promised never to leave again. But the apology wasn't enough. They needed something more. That night, in a room filled with beeping machines and hushed prayers, Bola said, "Let's rebuild. Not just the house. Everything." "What do you mean?" Emeka asked. "I mean a home," he said. "For others like us. Kids no one wants." And that's where the unthinkable began. One by one, they emptied their accounts. Jide called in favors from military friends. Toby contacted publishers and donors. Emeka called a press conference. Sei arranged the permits. Together, they returned to the place where their lives had changed, the broken 2-room house that had once been their sanctuary. It was time to make something sacred rise again. And as the town watched 5 men dig into the earth with their own hands, they realized this wasn't charity. This was legacy. This was love made visible. This was part 1 Dust flew as the first shovel struck the ground. The old compound that had once barely held together under storms was now filled with men whose hands were strong, whose eyes were wet with memories, and whose hearts beat with one unshakable promise. They would build something for her. Not just for her, but because of her. The town gathered slowly, watching from the shadows. Most had whispered curses about Kemi once. Some had warned her. Others had ignored her. But now they stood in silence as the 5 boys she raised, now men, in tailored suits and calloused hands, turned back the clock with each swing of a hammer. There was no architect, just purpose, no blueprint, just memory. They didn't hire a construction crew at first. They wanted to build it with their own hands, the way she built them. They remembered how she patched up cracked walls with cloth and hope. They remembered the smell of her bean cakes sizzling in reused oil because that's all she could afford. They remembered the way she rubbed their backs when nightmares came. So they worked day and night, sleeping in tents on that sacred ground, rain soaking through nylon and prayers soaking deeper into the soil. The first wall went up on Say's birthday. He turned 31 with tears in his eyes and cement in his hands. By the end of that week, they poured the foundation for a building they named the Kemi House of Light. But it wasn't just a home for orphans. It was something much bigger. It was a promise. They built classrooms with wide windows so sunlight could find even the quietest child. They built a kitchen 3 times bigger than the one they grew up with because they remembered what hunger felt like. They built a garden, filled it with mango trees and called it the Mother's Grove, where children could sit under shade and feel safe. News spread like wildfire. First came the media crews, curious, skeptical, hungry for a feel-good story. Then came donors from abroad, moved by the viral video Emeka posted of the 5 of them placing the first brick, each whispering for Mama before letting it go. Volunteers started pouring in, doctors, teachers, engineers, all drawn by something they couldn't explain. By the time the roof was placed, the town had changed. The same neighbors who once mocked Kemi now brought food for the workers. The same pastor who doubted her preached sermons about faith without sight. Even Kemi's estranged brother, now frail and humbled, stood beside her bed and wept. "You were right, sister. You were right all along." But none of it compared to the moment Kemi, barely able to walk, was wheeled through the new gates. Her eyes scanned the structure. Her hands trembled in her lap, and then she saw it, etched into the arch above the door, where the forgotten become family. She didn't cry, not at first. She just reached for their hands, one by one. Bola, the protector, Jide, the warrior, Toby, the dreamer, Emeka, the light, Sai, the healer, her boys, her sons, her legacy. "I thought I was just saving 5 lives," she whispered. "But you saved thousands." And they did. In the first year, the Kemi house welcomed 48 children, some abandoned, some orphaned, all broken in ways that no paperwork could explain. But within those walls, something divine unfolded. Children, who hadn't spoken in months, started singing. Girls, who flinched at footsteps, began dancing in the garden. Boys who knew only fists learned how to plant flowers and read poetry. Each corner of that house carried echoes of Kemi's voice, because the 5 men made sure her spirit wasn't just in the bricks, but in the very air. Bola taught in the classrooms every morning, using the same soft tone Kemi had used to teach him to read. Jide ran morning drills with the older boys, turning their anger into discipline, just as Mama had done with his rage. Toby led storytelling circles every evening, helping children reimagine their futures through tales of lions, stars, and mamas who never gave up. Emeka organized weekly movie nights, where laughter was mandatory and everyone got popcorn, even the shyest kids. And Say opened a clinic beside the main building. It was small, but it had everything his patients needed: medicine, music, and a picture of Kemi on the wall. They didn't just build a house, they built a revolution. A soft, quiet revolution fueled by kindness, but not everyone celebrated. There were whispers, men who feared what compassion could do, what it could expose. A developer from the city, jealous of the attention and land, tried to sabotage them. He sent men to intimidate the staff. He spread lies that the foundation was a fraud. When Emeka received a legal notice threatening to shut them down, he took the letter straight to the others. "We've faced worse," Bola said calmly. Jide nodded. "We don't bend," Toby added. "We tell our truth." Say, as always, stayed quiet, but his eyes held thunder. They fought, not with fists, with facts, with records, with testimonials from every child, every parent, every life that had been touched by the house. And when the court date arrived, Kemi walked into the courtroom herself, escorted by her 5 sons. She wore white. She walked slowly, but proudly. And when she stood before the judge and was asked, "What is this house really about?" she simply said, "It's about turning scars into stories." They won the case, not just legally, but in the hearts of every person who watched that old woman stand taller than any skyscraper. Years passed. The house grew. New buildings were added. More children came. And still, Kemi stayed. Even when her bones weakened. Even when her voice trembled. She stayed. Until the morning she didn't wake up. She passed in her sleep, holding Say's old baby shoe in one hand and a worn-out picture of all 5 boys in the other. There was no mourning that day. There was celebration. They wrapped her in the finest cloth, laid her to rest beneath the mango trees in the mother's grove, and etched into her stone. She chose love over fear, and the world was never the same. Thousands came. Children she never met. Mothers who had found hope through her story. Men who remembered being boys once, lost, angry, forgotten, and who now carried light because she chose to love when it cost everything. And the 5 stood before. The crowd, no longer just brothers, but legends. Bola took the microphone. His voice cracked. "She found us in the dark," Jide continued, "and showed us how to fight with love." Toby whispered, "She wrote herself into our stories." Emeka smiled through tears and laughed through our pain. Say stepped forward last. His voice was quiet, but it cut through every heartbeat. "She saved 5. But she changed millions. They opened a scholarship in her name, built a second home in another state, started a foundation that funded adoptions, education, and trauma, healing across the continent. And each time they did something new, they whispered the same prayer she once said over their sick beds long ago when they were just boys with scars and no names. Let this child rise. And they did. Because of her. Because one woman in a rainstorm long ago refused to walk away. Because she saw value where others saw burden. Because she believed love, even if it came late, could still save a soul. And as the sun set on the house of light, 5 men sat beneath the mango trees, now older, now gray at the edges, watching children play and run and laugh. "Do you ever wonder," Toby asked, "where we'd be if she hadn't shown up that day?" They were silent for a moment. Then Jide smiled. "Dead, or worse." "But she saw us," Bola whispered. "Chose us," said Emeka. "And that," Say added, looking at the stars beginning to appear above, "was the beginning of everything." They sat in silence after that, because there are no words big enough to explain how one woman's decision to love the unwanted rewrote the destiny of so many. There are only hearts, changed forever.